There's a dead heat in the race between Governor Pat Quinn and Bruce Rauner. One of them will be your next governor. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Is Pat Quinn a do-good governor who deserves 4 more years? Or is he an inept career politician who has squandered 6? And what about Bruce Rauner? Is he a businessman who can get Illinois' economy back on track, or a near-billionaire bully who doesn't deserve to be Illinois' next governor and is too out of touch with the commoner to understand how to govern? We'll inform you on Capitol View. I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thanks for joining us. And I'm joined by, over here on the far side, Andy Maloney. He's my friend and also a writer for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin. Also, Bruce Rushton, Illinois Times, writer, reporter extraordinaire. Let's start with some of the nitty-gritty issues. We'll get to the ads and what I'm assuming most of the voters are most aware of at this point in time. But the hard stuff, Illinois state budget. It is right now, we're operating in what I think could be characterized as a deficit. The budget that the General Assembly passed is one that does not get us through the year. Whoever's governor is going to come in right away with a heap of trouble on his hands. We have Pat Quinn, who says that Illinois needs to extend the income tax that he had signed into law. And on the other side, we have Bruce Rauner, who says that he wants to roll it back, although he hasn't said right away. Let's start with Pat Quinn. He wasn't able to get this plan through in the first place. Why should we trust that now he will? Bruce.
Well, I think he's got a legislative leadership that helped him get it through before, so why shouldn't they help him get it through again? And it's
in a lame duck, you mean?
Well, in a lame duck, that helps as well. And so if you elect Pat Quinn, I think the odds are probably much better that you'll get the tax increase extended, perhaps permanently. Rauner has, after a long time of not saying exactly what he would do, he has finally unveiled, okay, I'm going to do a gradual rollback. Surprise, surprise. But it's a more nuanced view, I think, or at least a more nuanced approach than what Pat Quinn has provided. And so it's going to play well, I think, probably outside Chicago, better than what Rauner's approach is. Rauner's approach is going to play better outside Chicago.
Because people don't want to give the government more of their money.
Of course not. Do you?
No comment. Reporter objectivity, but let's be clear, I see how state government operates, and I really do think that maybe that's part of the problem, that the legislature has made a lot of cuts, and yet there are many who would argue that they haven't made the case. You look at programs like the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative that has hurt Quinn in his campaign. He's supposed to be this, reformer, and yet it's under investigation, and critics say that it sure as heck looks as if he geared state grants toward areas that would help him win election the last time around. And so you look at that, and why should state government get more of my money? Andy, is there an answer? Does Illinois government need to have a higher tax base or tax rate, or I don't know, I guess we'll get there. Bruce Rauner says maybe it's a part of expanding the base, so less about the income tax rate, but moving to a modern economy, and that means beginning to tax some services and tagging on a sales tax.
Well, to get back to the politics, I think you're right. I think it becomes much more certain, I think, that if the voters do reelect Pat Quinn, that they're going to get that tax increase extended.
Why? Because Democrats will stand by it, a Democratic
They'll stand
governor?
by it a little bit more. We've seen folks even go so far as to take it as a mandate, right? There was a little bit of trepidation, I think, during the debates about Governor Quinn coming out and saying, yes, I am going to extend this tax increase.
He did all he could
to not say it directly, but the implication was certainly there. The implication has been there for some time, I think. And I think when people know that, and when the legislators and the governor himself see that folks know that and they are still reelected, it can be interpreted as a mandate.
But we have a whole bunch of Democrats that are running in the Illinois House in particular, where due to Democratic majorities and also just safer seats in the state Senate, the real battle appears to be in the Illinois House, that are running, Democrats as well as Republicans, particularly in the suburbs where Democrats have and are looking to make further gains, that have promised, no, I'm not going to vote for an income tax increase. These aren't lame ducks. These are people that are more toward the beginning of their political careers, if they have it their way, at least presumably. Doesn't that hurt, no matter who's governor?
Well, I'm shocked to hear that somebody running for political office would say they don't want tax increases. I've never heard of that before. I think that perhaps it adds up to gridlock. I mean, or at least potentially, if you've got folks that are coming into the House that get elected that are going to stand by their campaign promises, I'm not going to vote for that to extend that tax increase, then what do you do? And so, I'm not one to really, say that whatever campaign promises somebody makes, they're gonna stand by after they're elected. And again, we do have the lame duck session, and so that takes that out of the equation. You got Pat Quinn in office. We'll see, but I'm not particularly impressed by anybody's promise that they're not going to increase taxes. Read my lips. I won't raise taxes.
And I think it helps to have, like we've said, if Governor Quinn gets reelected, we've already got leadership in the chambers who, if they really do believe that that's what the state needs, Senate President Cullerton, for instance, came out and said, yes, I did say when we passed this to begin with that it was a temporary tax increase. But I also said we're going to look at it again in 2015. So I think if there's the will at the leadership level to get it done, it can become more likely and ultimately happen again.
But I think, frankly, Rauner, I think, has frankly produced a more progressive plan than what Quinn has. I mean, to talk about taxing services like 49 other states do, that's kind of, a big deal here in Illinois. It's not a big deal in the rest of the country. And so, I think that that's actually a move that could appeal to a lot of voters. I mean, would you rather pay, a higher tax on your income, or would you rather tax the lawyers and the accountants and those sorts of folks? So.
Well, so that gets to Governor Quinn has gotten a lot of kudos. Kudos are rare for the governor, it seems, but people that say that he deserves credit for a brave choice, running for re-election and making a big speech coming out for an income tax increase. Rauner, on the other hand, seems to really get pounced on for having a budget plan that doesn't square when he talks about wanting to invest more in education, in higher education, in state parks, and yet he wants to roll back the income tax increase. He has talked about taxing services, so a more modern economy that matches what other states do, and yet it's very narrow. Does he deserve any credit for that? And what are we to make of it? Is it just he wants to win, and then we're going to see him open the door to a whole lot more service taxes?
I think it's the devil you know. If you vote for Quinn, you can be pretty well assured that he's not going to tax services. He's made that perfectly clear. And so what are his alternatives aside from an income tax or extending the income tax increase? I haven't heard one. And frankly, again, I keep going back to Rauner, and he's got the advantage of being the challenger. He doesn't have a track record. He can say a lot of different stuff. What's politically realistic? That's kind of a question. Can you realistically tax the big question? And nobody really knows. And so, but yeah, I think
he deserves credit for that.
No, I don't think that he does. And I'm I'll go in the camp of the State Journal Register, which recently said you cannot tax yourself out of this mess. You have to get creative. You have to find some new solutions. And I have not seen any solutions from the Quinn camp other than, well, we'll just keep doing what we've doing, which is tax your income, and all these other things are off the table. I think that Rauner, frankly, and he hasn't said this, at least so far as I know, he might actually be willing to tax retirement income, which has been the whole, well, if Bill Gates retired tomorrow in Illinois, he'd pay no income tax. And that's just weird. I believe Illinois is the only state which doesn't tax retirement income. And it's not as bad as folks might think if you exempt the first, 7,500.
There are ways to do it, to carve it out.
There are ways to do it without pushing grandma out of her home, And so I see Rauner as saying, hey, I'm willing to have a more full and open discussion of taxation than I've seen Quinn say. And so I think that Rauner deserves credit for that.
But Andy, you're in the State House. Is Rauner going to have an issue where Republicans have been hesitant to get on board with any of these plans that bring in additional revenue to state coffers? Maybe for good reason. They are rarely included. Democrats say, hey, no, it's them. They don't want to come. Regardless, Democrats are in charge. It's not Republicans who are making the plans. It's giving them cover, or perhaps it's not fair to maybe call it cover, or good reason to vote no. If Rauner were to become governor, Are we going to have to see changes from the GOP? Will you see Democrats go along with Rauner as governor and whatever he's looking to do to bring in more revenue, or is this just too much of a scorched earth after this campaign? And will Republicans finally change their tune?
I think, in a sense, we'll get some more of those compromises being made legislatively. The Republicans, we see it all the time when stuff comes up. It oftentimes turns into a sort of a rail against the governor type situation. Whenever it's an initiative that's widely supported by the Dems, and that seems to be one of the few sort of things that the Republicans can kind of get in during the debate is that this is the governor's initiative. But if you have a Republican governor, even if the majorities remain largely the same in both chambers, you're going to have to kind of see folks coming along a little bit more, I think. You talked about raising new revenue. That issue, I think, broadly in the country, not just in Illinois with Republicans, but broadly with Republicans, is so toxic that it's sort of hard to imagine right now them getting on board anything dealing with revenue generation. We've seen the whole, cut here, cut waste and fraud and all that
Waste,
stuff
fraud,
for so many
abuse.
years. Yeah, exactly, for so many years. But with a Rauner administration, I think you're going to have to start see at least a little bit of a shift toward, okay, let's generate some policies. Maybe they raise revenue. We're just going to have to accept that at some point.
As we look at this campaign, I think it's been difficult to really parse out what either of these guys would actually do or stand for, because they are so careful about what they say. They don't want something to be used in a negative campaign ad, which is somewhat a hilarious notion, given that there's going to be an ad made out of whatever you say, whether you mean it or not. Let's be clear. But it's been difficult. And, I've kind of watched, and you see the Quinn campaign have ads about Rauner laying off workers, jobs outside of America. Look at him. He's overseas shipping jobs to China. And yet, at the same time, the Quinn campaign has clearly laid people off. He's closed state facilities and brags about it. So state workers don't have jobs, yet he's the savior of unions. I think the only way that we have a Quinn, after having signed the pension overhaul into law, that has support from unions, and it's because Bruce Rauner, the guy who during the primary railed against government union bosses, ended up as GOP's nominee. Was that a mistake? When you have so many downstate workers, again, these facility closures, when you have unions, university workers, teachers upset about the pension overhaul, looking for an alternative. And was it a mistake for Bruce Rauner to have made those remarks during the primary? And why has he moved away from it during the general? Bruce?
Well, as far as unions go, unions, I can't see them ever supporting Bruce Rauner. There's just, and he may be trying to lure them back a little bit. It's kind of a natural thing, but I see that as just an impossible mission. He's not going to be able to do it. And as far as the candidates staying, not getting out of their foxholes and not saying a lot, I think that is because anytime any one of them starts freelancing, they get themselves in trouble. Rauner on his flip-flop on the minimum wage. If I was on Rauner's campaign, the way I would spend my money is I would buy advertising time to run, Quinn's 2010 State of the Union address, where he rambled on for 45 minutes and called himself Soy Boy. This is the guy that's at the helm. Yeah, people were scratching their heads. Who is this guy? He was clearly not ready to be governor then. And, the question is how much has he improved since then? But if I was Rauner, that's what I'd do. I would run this is Quinn in his own words, and with a scroll message on the bottom saying, "You want this guy to be your governor still?" But again, Rauner's not much better. He again, in addition to the flip-flop on the minimum wage, he's told alternate stories about clouding his daughter into Walter Payton Prep with Arnie Duncan. And so it's turned into a campaign, perhaps not surprisingly, where I think it's run largely by consultants. It's run by TV ads. Have you seen any TV ads lately for the gubernatorial race? And frankly, I think Quinn's shown much better ads than Rauner has. Quinn's had some masterful ads.
How, with Rauner's money, has he not done better in that department?
Because what's he going to say? I made myself myself $1 billion. Well, we already know that. I did it on the backs of people that I could lay off and bully. Well, we already know that. And so all that Rauner, I think, can really point to in his ads is that I decide I want to do something and I do it. And, that's his main message here is that, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to steamroll. I'm going to shake up Springfield. I'm going to steamroller anybody who gets in my way. And so that's kind of the message I think that he's put out. I think, frankly, that Quinn has played in a little bit into that message. I mean, that he's, I thought that one of the most effective ads we've seen has been the most recent one on the heart drug for the little children, for the kids. That is just devastating. I think it's much more devastating than the one that's gotten so much kudos about I'll bankrupt you, I'll bury you, that sort of thing. I mean, a little kid, the nursing home.
What heartless
what
guy
heartless person would do that? Lost in the shuffle here is the fact that in fact he prevailed in court. The FTC did make certain allegations that were rejected apparently by a judge, but you can't walk away from that. And it's interesting that Rauner has not tried to counter that, because I don't see any counter to that.
I don't know how Rauner hasn't made more about the cuts that Quinn has made. I mean, there's plenty there that the governor has presided over that could be equally harmful. Find somebody that has lost access to state services. Again, many of the things that Quinn counts as his successes have meant a lot of harm for people. Changes, for example, to Medicaid. Get somebody
I think that's
there.
a glass houses argument, though. I mean,
sure, but who cares? It's an ad, right?
It's an ad, all right.
Come on.
But Quinn stands up and say, "You think that I'm like being mean to people? You
just
said that?
wait.
Come
Just
on."
wait. Andy, how about you? Do you have a favorite ad?
I don't have a favorite ad. I think it's interesting, though, that the dynamic of the race, when we go back to last year when Rauner first got involved and we first started to get to know him a little bit with the hammer and shake ads and that type of thing. It's interesting that it seems like it was those ads that kind of really helped him come onto the scene, and we haven't seen sort of that same kind of popular ad since then.
He's made one mistake. He needs to get a Carhartt jacket that's actually been used instead of one that just pulled the price tag off. The Carhartt jacket.
But it seems like as Quinn has sort of evolved his game, at least as far as ads go, Bruce seems like he's gotten bottled up in this one sort of one-dimensional sort of message. And originally he had the message of term limits. We know that that's not going to be on the ballot now, so
that's not going to be on the ballot.
That's a blow to his campaign.
On the ballot. I mean, the stuff, some of these constitutional, these so-called initiatives, that could very well draw people out.
I think it definitely will. If you looked at, there was a recent Paul Simon Institute poll on all of those ballot measures, and pretty much all of them are extremely popular. We know the minimum wage is one of the most popular economic policies you can ask somebody about, right? But then the other ones too, the millionaire tax, polling well, something like 2/3 to 3/4 of folks who are asked about it.
It's not going to happen. I mean, let's be clear. This
Exactly.
is a non-binding referendum for a constitutional amendment.
So the millionaire tax and the...
It's for voters that aren't informed and don't really think.
No.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But if those folks see that, and there's been ads too for...
paid for by, notably, unions. I mean, they've got, I think, $2.7 million, all pretty much from AFSCME and the AFL-CIO. So it's really Quinn money, is what you can consider that.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think what's going on here is that we're seeing as this plays out that Rauner is pretty much a one-trick pony, which is I am not Pat Quinn. And Pat Quinn is the most unpopular Democratic governor in the entire nation. And if he pulls this one out, and frankly, I think he will, I think that Pat Quinn wins by maybe 2 points. It's going to be really close. But
we've got this libertarian candidate who's also taken votes away from presumably Rauner. That's going to factor in.
It's about as toss-up gets, it seems like, in some of the recent polling that's been done.
We're a Democratic state, and Democrats have done all they could to push that vote out, to get the blues, to make this state stay blue.
And despite the closeness, more of the recent polls I think you're seeing have trended toward Quinn. We've seen Quinn up 2-3 points in a lot of the latest ones. And even the aggregate polls now, with some of those huge leads that Rauner had at the beginning, the margin has shrunk to almost a dead heat within the margin of error in several.
I'm surprised he hasn't pulled out, some of his friends. He's got the endorsement of the CEO of Caterpillar. Let's get Doug Oberhammer out and cut an ad, show him as more than a one-trick pony instead of the mean guy. There's time. Advice for the Rauner campaign. Here's my question. We're looking at a near $100 million race, record-setting, double 4 years ago. And at that point in time, Quinn outspent Republican Bill Brady. right now we have Rauner, who is outspending Quinn. That does not factor in, of course, all of the money that Quinn is spending on the taxpayers' dime to go around this state. He's spent every day this week that we filmed announcing some major new company that's coming in and a whole bunch of jobs. And we even had one of the spokespeople for a state agency say, yeah, we wanted this out before the election. Is that a crime? Didn't look good. Not a crime, but it doesn't look good that you're waiting to announce these jobs just for the election.
I kind of wonder, though, not to interrupt,
yeah,
but
go ahead.
What if this had been occurring instead of the midterms, instead of a presidential year? I mean, how would that have changed the dynamic? I think that it would have been, a steeper mountain maybe for Quinn to climb.
Right.
But we'll see. I mean, it's always going to be a challenge to get folks interested if the president isn't on the ballot.
Well, so here's my question. If we're seeing Rauner begin to fall behind in polls, and yet he's put in $26 million of his own money and has so much more money than Pat Quinn. If Rauner cannot win this race, does a Republican have a chance in the future? Is it that Rauner is a flawed candidate, or is it that Illinois is just done with Republicans statewide?
The right Republican has a chance. I mean, for example, if Kirk Dillard had been the nominee, Kirk Dillard would be governor today. I don't think there's any question about that. The Republicans shot themselves proverbially in the foot, by running Jim Ryan. If Jim Ryan hadn't been in the race, Brady wouldn't have gotten the nomination. Dillard would have run against Quinn, and Quinn would have been steamrollered. But the Republicans, they cannot get their act together when it comes to reaching a decision on who should run for governor, who's electable, and that's their problem. But I don't think it means the Republican can't be elected. I mean, you get a certain amount of, I think, corruption fatigue that has been, and it's been on both sides. I mean, they're Ryan, but primarily it's been on the Democratic side, which isn't surprising because Democrats have been in power. But at some point in time, you just get the electorate, I think, that gets, we're in a quagmire. Need something new, but the Republicans have not been able to come up with something.
Rauner is just too big of a bully. And Bruce, I know you wanted to touch on kind of a way that's hit his bully Bruce has factored.
Not me. I didn't.
I don't know. I'm sure people that you've interviewed might disagree, huh? But no, I was not talking about you. No. But bullying a journalist, Bruce.
I don't think that we're talking about Dave McKinney. I don't think Bruce Rauner bullied Dave McKinney at all. I think Bruce Rauner bullied the Sun-Times and got away with it. And so
he says no. He says he didn't make any calls to any of the heads of the Sun-Times, and
Bruce Rauner himself may not have made any phone calls, but I believe the campaign has said, "Yep, we absolutely did it." And I don't blame the campaign for doing that. That's what these folks do in situations like this. It's their job to do that. It's equally the job of the Sun-Times and other newspapers to say, you know what, take a hike. And it didn't happen in this case. And I think whatever happens with this gubernatorial race, the lasting effect may well be on political journalism in Illinois, because Dave McKinney was huge. He was absolutely huge. And this has gotten, it got coverage in Politico, it got coverage in the Washington Post. This is actually, in some ways, a national story. For those who don't know about it, it was Dave McKinney co-authored a piece on October 6th in which it was, guess what? Bruce Rauner bullied somebody. He said, "I will bury you, I will bankrupt
Supposedly.
you." Well,
this isn't a deposition. It hasn't been proven. But go ahead.
Yeah, it's only set under penalty of perjury. But, he absolutely bullied somebody who said, "If this woman sues me for wrongful termination, I'll ruin her." Is anybody surprised? Isn't that kind of like what Bruce Rauner would do? What did you expect he would do? If that's kind of the guy he is. And so when McKinney was going to write this story, and it was clear that it was going to come out, the Rauner campaign put all kinds of pressure on the Sun-Times to kill that piece on the grounds that Dave McKinney was married to a Democratic political consultant. And the problem is that all that had been cleared with Sun-Times management way before Dave McKinney ever got married. And so the time to settle that question was in January, before the campaign really heated up, when Dave McKinney went to his bosses and said, "I'm going to get married. Here's the arrangements we've made," and they signed off on it. And that should have been over, finished, and done with. And they either should have signed off on it, or they should have said no. But now after the fact, and not to go too far into the weeds, he had to hire a very well-respected attorney who pretty much, I don't know, put a gun to their head is too strong. But when Patrick Collins says, "Hey, you got an issue here," you should listen to him. And they didn't, apparently. They said, "Okay, you can have your job back and you can return." And the first day they yanked his byline. It was a shell game.
So Andy, briefly here, because I want to get to a story that you've been reporting on with this Dave McKinney situation, is that going to hurt Rauner?
Well,
or is this an inside baseball thing?
I think this is inside baseball, and I think the one thing that I can say is that working down the hall and also having worked with Dave for a session or so.
Great reporter.
I mean, fantastic reporter. Everybody in that State House knows so many narratives during a campaign season and beyond were driven by his reporting.
What about your reporting here on the race for retention for the sole Illinois Supreme Court justice who has a chance of losing his seat on the bench? This was a huge race a decade ago. Now Lloyd Carmeier is up. We're seeing all sorts of last-minute money from out of state come in. We don't have a lot of time, but what's going on here? Is he in the wrong for not having?
Well, it's a similar flavor to what happened 10 years ago, because that was a nasty battle. That was a contested battle. This is a retention campaign. He's got to get 60% or more of the vote in order to keep his Supreme Court seat. But a group of trial lawyers has put together a committee saying that he basically kowtows to corporate interests. Philip Morris, the cigarette maker, State Farm Insurance, they accused of funneling all of this money into his campaign 10 years ago, and that's how he won. And then in 2005, a year later, they argue that he made rulings favorable to their interests. So fast forward 10 years later, a lot of them are rehashing this. They've created this committee that's donated $1.3 million into ads.
Could he lose his seat?
I don't believe so. We'll have to wait and see for the returns, but no Supreme Court justice has lost a retention election.
But it's big money in politics all over the place. We're about to wrap up. We're talking about, of course, not just the governor's race. We have these constitutional amendments. We have non-binding referenda. We have a couple of close races, namely that for treasurer. The rest of the constitutional races, polling seems to say we have a pretty clear winner at this point in time. Some contentious races in the Illinois House and Senate. The Senate looks like it's going to stay pretty much as it is. Briefly, how many House seats do you expect to change in the Illinois House?
Oh, I wouldn't guess much more than a few, a handful if that.
Not enough.
Not enough. Democrats will keep their majority, probably,
there's
for
no
sure. Maybe the supermajority as well.
Yeah, and that's what matters. Yeah.
Well, we will wait and see after Tuesday. Everybody remember to vote. Thanks so much for joining this week on Capitol View. Remember, you can find us on Facebook at Capitol View Politics. Joining me for this program this week, Andy Maloney of the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin and Bruce Rushton of the Illinois Times. I'm Amanda Vinicky with WUIS and Illinois Public Radio. Thanks.